Welcome to Echo Tales. Settle in, grab your headphones, because this isn't merely another tale of heartbreak. This one begins with a jar of pickles and a receipt for yoga pants that weren't mine. I stood in the harsh, fluorescent glow of aisle 7 at a discount grocery, a leaking jar of garlic dill pickles clutched in one hand, a creased shopping list in the other. That's when it hit me. I was no longer buying for two. And somehow, that mundane realization pierced deeper than the moment she actually walked out the door. Let me take you back. My name is Monroe. Yes, it often prompts comparisons to an aging jazz singer or a cartographically confused county. I understand. I'm 38. I own a collection of cardigans, and car commercials still bring tears to my eyes. I'm not the protagonist of grand ballads. I'm merely a muted hum in someone else's symphony. For 5 years, that's exactly what I was in Becca's life. We were married. Or, perhaps more accurately, she was technically married while constantly, emotionally, auditioning for an upgrade. I didn't see it. Or perhaps I did, but chose not to confront it, like a slow leak in a tire you ignore until your car suddenly swerves on a rainy Tuesday. Those words, came on a perfectly unremarkable Monday, as I stood microwaving leftover lasagna. Let's take a break. I need to feel like myself again. No raised voices, no arguments. Just that flat, casual pronouncement, as if suggesting a new brand of laundry detergent. I asked if it was something I'd done. No, she'd said, it's just me. I need clarity. Like an idiot, I nodded. Mumbled something utterly pathetic, okay, if that's what you need. I even offered her the last piece of garlic bread. She declined. She packed an overnight bag, as if for a casual wellness retreat. Her wedding ring was left on the sink, beside her toothbrush and an almond milk coupon. That was 3 months ago. In that span, I've learned that taking a break is often coded language for I've already moved on. I just need you to be the one who shatters first. Initially, I honored her request for space. No texts, no unexpected appearances. I journaled, I cooked soup, I paced my apartment in bewildered circles like a disoriented specter. Then, I began to notice the shift. Her social media became an inferno, blazing like a digital aurora. New selfies, new smiles, new faces crowding the backgrounds, none of them familiar. And of course, clarity coaches. Then, about 4 weeks in, the package arrived. Addressed to her, it was mistakenly delivered to my door. I opened it, expecting one of her frivolous candles or some ethically sourced socks. Instead, it was a large men's hoodie, and inside, a note. Smells like you already. Can't wait to see you tonight. M. I stared at that note as if it might spontaneously combust. My hands trembled, not with rage. I'm not the rageful sort, but with a hot wave of shame and the crushing realization that she was never coming back because she never intended to. So, I did the only thing left. I took a break to. A permanent one. I didn't call. I didn't respond when, weeks later, her text finally came. Hey, can we talk? I think I made a mistake. You know what I did? I sent her a picture of the hoodie, hanging from a tree in the very park we used to walk through, and nothing more. That was the first double text, then a triple, then calls, just like that. The woman who craved space was desperately trying to re-enter my orbit. But this time, I stood my ground. After sending that image of the hoodie, a forgotten flag of surrender dangling from a tree limb, I'd expected a surge of vindication, perhaps even a night of sleep. Spoiler alert. Neither happened. Instead, I lay awake, watching the shadows on my ceiling writhe and stretch as her messages streamed in, relentless. Why would you do that? Can we talk, please? I'm serious. I need to see you. I messed up. It's ironic, isn't it? The very people who claim to need space come sprinting back the moment you truly give it to them. By morning, 6 missed calls and a voicemail, starting with her whispering my name as if we were still intimate. Her voice was shaky, not the practiced tremor of theatrical tears, but a genuine, profound tremble. The kind of sound that escapes when you realize the door you just walked through has locked behind you, and there's no longer a handle on the outside. But I remained silent. For the first time in months, perhaps even years, I chose to maintain that silence. Not as a strategic maneuver, nor as a vengeful tactic, but because I no longer owed her my pain. She had already squandered it, like loose change. Over the next few days, the intensity mounted. First, she appeared outside my building. I peered through the peephole like a nervous detective, watching her stand there in that familiar green coat she'd worn on so many errands. She remained for 40 minutes, simply standing, no calls, no knocks, as if the sheer weight of silence might draw her back inside. I didn't open the door. 2 days later, an email arrived. Yes, a proper email. Not a DM, not a text, but a 3-paragraph monologue, formally titled, "What I Need You to Understand." It read like a confession, but one where all the truly ugly parts were meticulously omitted. She claimed she hadn't meant to fall for someone else, that she'd felt invisible in our marriage, that Mark simply helped her rediscover parts of herself. Mark, naturally, was his name. She stated it was over between them, that she'd ended it 2 weeks prior, and that she'd realized too late the grass wasn't greener, merely newer, and novelty always fades. She hadn't slept in days, she said. Everything reminded her of me. The email concluded, "I still have the key. If I leave it under your doormat, will that mean I can come home?" I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the park, found that tree, and retrieved the hoodie. I dropped it into a donation bin. She wasn't coming back because there was nothing left to return to. She'd burned the bridge and now expected me to provide the spine for its reconstruction. I believed that would be the end. But then she discovered Callie. Not a girlfriend, not even a budding romance, just someone I'd met at a bookstore who made me snort with laughter. Becca, I presume, uncovered this through one of her digital espionage maneuvers. And that's when the polite pleading mutated into something entirely different: rage, entitlement, possessiveness. She appeared again, this time bellowing my name from the sidewalk as if we were characters in a teen drama. My neighbors discreetly peeked through their blinds. I opened the window and calmly stated, "This isn't serving your purpose." Her face crumbled, and in that moment I understood. The break she demanded, she never imagined it would break her. The true turning point, I believe, the moment it finally resonated with her that I wasn't merely an extension of her emotional convenience, was when I walked right past her outside the bakery and didn't even falter. Just a perfunctory nod, as if she were a stranger I'd once stood behind in line. Nothing more. I hadn't planned it, hadn't rehearsed the scene. But I knew she registered the shift instantly. Her reaction wasn't confusion, it was stark panic. That silent, wide-eyed desperation that grips someone as they begin to lose control over a narrative they once dictated in bold print. I could hear her footsteps scrambling behind me, quick and uneven, the frantic pace of someone trying to outrun a mistake they believed would never catch them. I could have turned, could have offered a shred of dignity, but I didn't. I simply kept walking until I reached my car, entered, and drove away. No rage, no verbal exchange, just distance. That was the moment she truly fractured. 2 hours later, a message from her sister, someone I hadn't heard from since our wedding rehearsal dinner, when she'd spilled wine on my shirt and dissolved into 3 minutes of laughter. "Hey, Becca's not okay. You really hurt her. I'm not trying to pick sides, but could you at least talk to her? She hasn't eaten in days." I stared at the message, trying to ascertain if I should feel anything. Perhaps I should have. The old Monroe might have driven straight to her apartment, armed with soup and that peculiar, smoky tea she favored. Instead, I blocked her sister's number, because no one checked if I'd eaten when I was sleeping on the couch, weeping into a hoodie that wasn't mine. No one messaged her when I was pacing the hallway at 2 a.m., wondering why, taking space, felt so much like abandonment. Still, I'm not cold. I'm not heartless. I'm just tired. Later that night, I saw Becca's black and white Instagram post, a filtered photo of herself, captioned with a quote about regret being the cruelest teacher. I knew it wasn't for her followers, it was for me. Every caption, every story, all of it suddenly felt like a breadcrumb trail she was meticulously laying to guide me back. But this time, I wasn't following. Something had fundamentally shifted, not just within me, but around me. People I hadn't connected with in years began to reach out. Friends I'd believed lost in the churn of her social circle confessed they missed me. One even remarked, "I always wondered how you tolerated her moods." And it stung, because I had indeed made her moods my burden. I had been the human sponge, absorbing her dissatisfaction, her chilling silences, her cold sarcasm parading as wit. And for what? To be summarily discarded the moment someone with tighter jeans and a rooftop apartment materialized. The final push came 3 nights later. She appeared at my door. Not outside, not a text, but at the door. And she used the key. I was on the couch, rewatching an old ocean documentary, my default when my thoughts become too clamorous. She walked in without knocking, simply standing in the entryway like a stranger who'd realized, too late, she'd entered the wrong home. She looked ravaged. That's the word. Like someone who had played a high-stakes game and wagered everything she couldn't afford to lose. "I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice a thin, raspy echo of someone who'd screamed themselves hoarse. I didn't yell, didn't even stand. I simply muted the TV. "You used the key," I stated, calmly. "I didn't know if you'd answer," she replied. "That's precisely the point," I said. Then I rose, walked over, gently took the key from her trembling hand, and dropped it into the small ceramic bowl by the door, the one that used to hold our car keys, loose change, and gum wrappers from forgotten road trips. "You're not the same person," she whispered, almost as if it were a compliment. "I know," I said. "And neither are you." That's when she shattered. Right there in the hallway where we once slow danced to terrible indie songs. She collapsed into a torrent of apologies and trembling fingers, repeating, "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought you'd still be waiting." I said nothing. Sometimes, the most resounding action is to leave the silence unbroken. The morning after Becca's unannounced arrival, I anticipated silence. Perhaps shame. Or one of her meticulously crafted, verbose texts, the kind that attempted to spin guilt into twisted poetry. What I didn't foresee was the firestorm. I woke unusually late, my phone a vibrating inferno of notifications, calls, messages, and mentions. Apparently, sometime between her emotional collapse at my door and the dawn, Becca had taken to social media like a cornered animal. She posted a meticulously filtered photo of us from our 2nd anniversary at the lake, me grinning foolishly, her holding a wine glass with that signature, smug half-smile, captioned, "When you love someone enough to forgive the pain they caused, but they'd rather pretend you never existed." It was vague, strategic, but it had venom. Within hours, the reactions poured in. Old acquaintances, some of her friends, even mutual connections I barely recognized, were commenting, "You deserve better. He doesn't know what he lost." One even DM'd me to label me a narcissist, a term hurled like confetti when someone refuses to acknowledge they torched their own home and found themselves shivering in the ashes. And yet I remained silent. Not for lack of defense. Oh, I possess volumes, screenshots, journal entries, even voice memos I'd recorded merely to process my own spiraling thoughts when she departed. But I didn't post. I didn't comment. Instead, I went to work, clocking in at the small community center where I'd recently begun assisting with the after-school writing program. I smiled at the children, listened as one recited a poem about his dog. And all the while, in the quiet periphery of my mind, Becca's digital bonfire raged on. By late afternoon, my sister called. "You need to say something," she urged. "She's portraying this as if you ghosted her after she had a breakdown." "I did," I said, "but only after she erased me first." "You think people are going to demand the full timeline," she snapped. "No one reads nuance anymore, Monroe." She was right, but I still didn't post. Because Becca didn't crave closure, she craved control. And I refused to hand it back to her with a meticulously curated rebuttal. But it didn't end there. It rarely does when someone feels the stage they built for themselves slipping away. The next escalation came at the community center itself. I had just finished guiding a 7th grader through a short story about a haunted violin, honestly, better than half the prose I penned in college, when our program director discreetly pulled me aside. "Monroe," she began, her fingers fiddling with her necklace. "This is awkward. We received a message from someone claiming you're emotionally unstable, asserting you're using the center to rebuild your image after a toxic breakup. My heart didn't just sink, it disintegrated. I asked who sent it. She wouldn't disclose, but I didn't need to ask. I knew. And that was the grim realization. Becca wasn't merely unraveling. She was deliberately dismantling, piece by piece, attempting to reduce me to a caricature that fit her carefully constructed victim narrative. So, I did something I hadn't done in months. I wrote. Not a post, not a tweet, not a sharp retort. I wrote a letter to myself. 5 pages, handwritten, raw, unflinchingly ugly, and brutally honest. I held nothing back. I confessed that yes, I had also faltered. I had become overly passive. I let crucial things slide. I evaded confrontation. I remained silent when she openly mocked me, believing it was just how she is. But I also reminded myself of the things I did right. I championed her career, even as mine crumbled. I prepared meals when she couldn't recall her last grocery trip. I held her through panic attacks, even after she accused me of being the source of her confinement. That letter didn't go viral. It didn't sway public opinion or compel anyone to choose sides. But it saved me, because when someone attempts to rewrite your character in their narrative, the most potent act is to begin authoring your own. You know how they say the truth always surfaces eventually? I used to believe that was merely a platitude people offered themselves to cope with injustice, a comforting notion for those who lacked the power to speak louder than lies. But as it turns out, truth does emerge, just not always in the manner one anticipates. Sometimes it seeps out slowly, clumsily, precisely when your hands are too weary to uphold it yourself. After Becca's not-so-subtle public meltdown and the bizarre email sent to the community center, I assumed things had peaked. I figured she'd scream into the void for a few more days, perhaps update her playlist with more melancholic indie tunes, and then pivot to her next grand reinvention. That was her pattern. Becca was never one to sit still with her grief. She performed it. But then, something truly unexpected occurred. She became sloppy. It began with a podcast appearance. One of those niche lifestyle shows hosted by individuals who genuinely believe crystals can remedy trauma. I suppose a friend, perhaps hers, perhaps Mark's, I'd lost track, invited her to speak about self-growth after heartbreak. I only discovered it because a colleague from the center forwarded me the link, uncertain whether to laugh or be alarmed. I listened to it alone, late at night, in the dark, needing to hear what distorted version of me she would present this time. She began calmly, measured. She spoke of reclaiming her space, reconnecting with her intuition, realizing she had been living a life not truly her own. But about 20 minutes in, her composure began to falter. Her voice cracked. She stumbled over a sentence concerning emotional support. And then, she uttered something that made my skin crawl. I used to think he was the kind one, the quiet one. But sometimes, silence is manipulation, too. It was a masterful stroke, subtle enough to slip unnoticed, yet sharp enough to wound if you knew where to look. And yet, this time, it didn't land as she intended. Because 5 minutes later, the host, a woman named Isla whose voice was like wind chimes, countered with something that froze Becca mid-sentence. Do you think perhaps you confused your guilt with his silence? There was a long, excruciating pause. Then, Becca offered the softest maybe I have ever heard. That moment shattered something. Not just the interview, but the entire carefully sculpted narrative she'd spent months constructing. The comments beneath the podcast didn't unfold as she'd hoped either. Some praised it as empowering, but others began to pose questions. Why does this story seem so one-sided? She left him, didn't she? Why is she framing herself as the victim? Why does she keep using vague phrases like, I needed to feel again, without ever revealing what truly transpired? And that's when people, friends, mutual connections, complete strangers, began quietly contacting me. Some offered apologies. Others admitted they'd initially believed her, but now felt disoriented. One message, however, resonated deeply. It was from a woman named Ava, someone I'd met once, perhaps twice, during a game night at Becca's former colleague's home. Hey, Monroe. I know we barely know each other, but I just wanted to say I heard the podcast, and I saw her during that whole break period. You didn't deserve any of this. She wasn't truthful with anyone. I didn't reply, but I sat with that message for hours, not because I craved validation, but because it affirmed what I had silently suspected for months. Becca's truth wasn't truth at all. It was a meticulously rehearsed monologue, constantly rewritten to suit the current audience. And now, that audience was beginning to dissent. Meanwhile, my own life, the one she had undoubtedly assumed would crumble without her, was slowly, awkwardly, beautifully, beginning to coalesce. I'd enrolled in a writing class, auditing it purely for pleasure. I'd begun collaborating with a friend to design a curriculum for high schoolers who felt invisible within the rigid confines of the standard education system. I even adopted an ancient, grumpy cat named Spencer, who despised everyone except me and one perpetually faulty heater vent. And the best part? I hadn't posted a single word about any of it. Because healing isn't a performance. And genuine forgiveness isn't owed simply because someone regrets getting caught. What Becca failed to grasp was that the break she demanded wasn't a pause button on my life. It was a liberation pass, permission to stop waiting, to stop explaining, to stop immolating myself just to keep her warm. And once that switch flipped, she couldn't undo it. Not with tears, not with manipulative guilt, not even with public self-immolation disguised as self-awareness. There's a specific kind of silence that feels heavier than any sound. The kind that hums in the periphery of your day, an unspoken promise of impending detonation. That's how it felt the week following the podcast. I received no communication from Becca. No texts, no calls, no vague, guilt-ridden Instagram quotes. Nothing. Initially, I thought perhaps she'd finally conceded. That the on-air moment of honesty, the subtle unraveling before a microphone and 1,000 strangers, had finally marked her definitive conclusion. But I should have known better. Becca was never one for quiet demises. She always required the final declaration, even if it meant carving it into something that wasn't hers to claim. It started subtly. A follow request from a fresh Instagram account. No profile picture, no posts. Just a random alphanumeric username. I ignored it. The next day, another. Then another. And then, a message from an unfamiliar user. Hey, are you the guy Becca used to be with? Just curious. Heard some stuff. I didn't respond, but the intention became transparent. She was attempting to ascertain if I was seeing anyone. Not directly, not overtly, but through proxies, through anonymous digital peeks. She had lost access to my world and was now circling it like a locked-out ex, pacing around a brightly lit house. Then one evening, as I was securing the center after a late workshop, I spotted it. A note, tucked beneath my windshield wiper. It was handwritten, tremulous, hurried, folded 3 times, as if she'd hesitated to deliver it at all. I opened it in the driver's seat, my hands trembling. You don't get to pretend I never existed. I'm not some phase you outgrew. You said we were real. You said forever. Don't rewrite the story just because I made one mistake. No name, no signature. But none was needed. I stared at the paper for so long that I didn't realize I'd begun to cry. Not from fear, but from a profound exhaustion. The kind that settles in when someone attempts to drag you back into a blaze you finally managed to crawl out of. I never mentioned the note to anyone. I simply crumpled it into the glove box, drove home in silence, and sat on my couch for hours, Spencer curled on my lap, purring like a tiny, steadfast engine refusing to let me fracture, but the escalation persisted. 3 nights later, Callie, the woman I'd casually seen a few times, called me in a panic. We hadn't spoken in over a week. Our connection was friendly, light, nothing serious. She showed up at my apartment, Callie said, her voice trembling. Your ex. She knew my name. She didn't knock. Just stood outside for like 20 minutes, staring. Then she left. My heart plummeted. I felt that familiar, insidious shame begin to creep in. The same shame I used to shoulder every time Becca created a spectacle, distorted a narrative, or transformed her personal chaos into a tempest I felt compelled to shield her from. I'm so sorry, I murmured. I'll handle this. Kelly was kind. Excessively kind. She insisted she wasn't scared, merely confused. She said Becca looked shattered, not angry, just hollow. And perhaps that should have softened me, but it didn't. Because showing up uninvited at a stranger's home isn't an expression of sorrow, it's an assertion of control. It's desperation cloaked as mourning, and that's when it clicked. She didn't genuinely want me back. She simply couldn't tolerate that I had survived her absence, that I was rebuilding, however tentatively. That I no longer orbited her emotional chaos, that I possessed stories and smiles that neither began nor ended with her. So, I changed the locks. I blocked every digital avenue. I even consulted a lawyer friend about filing a no-contact order, not out of fear, but because I needed to declare, with every fiber of my being, that I was finished being a background character in her relentless drama. I was authoring a new story now, one defined by boundaries. One where silence wasn't a punishment, but profound peace. But I should have known. Becca wasn't finished. Not yet. Because individuals like her, those who construct their entire identity from the reflection of others, don't fade quietly. They self-destruct, spectacularly, in public. There's a brand of desperation that manifests without tears, without the sound of shouting or pleading. It appears in the quiet, unkempt corners, at the wrong time, among the wrong crowd, always on the wrong stage. And when Becca finally shattered for real, it wasn't in some dramatic one-on-one confrontation or behind a veil of privacy. It was before everyone. Those who knew her, those who didn't, and tragically for her, those equipped with cameras. It occurred at a bookshop. Not just any bookshop, but the very one where we first crossed paths. I hadn't set foot in it for years, and frankly, I'd never intended to. But it still stood, with its worn wooden counter and that peculiar corner where the reading chairs faced a stained carpet rather than any semblance of a view. And that's where she chose to make her spectacle. It was a community event, an open mic night focused on healing and self-expression. I only learned about it because a friend from the writing center texted me, "Becca's here. You won't believe what she's saying. Check the live stream." I should have ignored it, but I didn't. I clicked the link and instantly saw her under a soft spotlight, clutching the microphone as if it were her sole anchor. Her makeup was smudged, her voice tremulous, but she still draped herself in that familiar mantle of theatrics, every sentence layered with dramatic pauses, tears appearing precisely on cue. She was reading from something. A journal, perhaps, or one of those unsent letters people romanticize online. He didn't hit me. He didn't scream. But silence can be a form of violence, too. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded, others simply stared. I gave him everything, she continued. My vulnerability, my chaos, and when I fell apart, he didn't catch me. He just watched. She began to weep then, whether genuinely or rehearsed, I'll never truly know. And then she made a colossal mistake. And now, while I wake up every night trying to forget the sound of his silence, he's out there with her. That blonde from the poetry meetups. The one who writes about broken vases like it's some profound art form. There it was. Names, specifics, direct accusations. All live-streamed. All captured. The video proliferated rapidly. I didn't share it, didn't comment. But others did. People who knew me, people who had heard her podcast, people who had witnessed her meticulous attempts to rewrite history. And suddenly, her own words became the very wrecking ball she couldn't evade. Comment after comment. Wait, didn't she leave him? So, she stalked his new partner? This ISN isn't healing. This is spiraling. It's giving main character syndrome, honestly. And it worsened. Someone from the event posted raw, behind-the-scenes footage of her being gently asked to step down after veering wildly off script. She refused. Security was called, and as she was escorted out, she shrieked at someone in the audience, "Stop looking at me like I'm insane." The damage was irreparable. Not inflicted by me, not by any act of revenge, but by the very instrument she had always used to control every room, her voice. The next morning, a message from Callie. A single sentence. You don't need to say anything. Everyone sees it now. And they did. Becca went silent for 3 days. Her social media accounts were purged. The podcast deleted. Even her closest enablers, the ones who once reposted her quotes and lauded her courage, abruptly ceased tagging her. I should have felt victorious, vindicated. but I didn't. I simply felt weary. Because even when truth prevails, it rarely comes without cost. I had spent months painstakingly dragging myself out of that emotional trench, striving to make peace with my own reflection again, learning to inhabit my sadness rather than outsourcing it to someone else. And now I had to witness the person who once held my heart like fragile china utterly implode before a crowd of strangers. And still, I didn't respond. No post. No statement. No reaction. But I did do one thing. I carefully packed away the last remaining artifacts of our shared time. Old photographs. That absurd candle she claimed smelled of hope. The playlist I could no longer bear to hear. And I took a drive. Not to discard them. Not to incinerate them. I buried them. Literally. A small, nondescript box, deep in the woods behind the writing center. A spot known only to me. It was a ritual not born of anger, but of definitive closure. Because I finally comprehended the true essence of that break. It wasn't merely distance. It wasn't a punishment. It was the universe's way of separating a man who was finally learning to articulate from a woman who only knew how to shriek. 6 months have passed. 6 months since the last message. Since the last knock on my door. Since Becca's name last flickered across my screen, an echo from a life that no longer held me. And in that half year, something occurred that I once believed impossible for someone like me. I began to breathe effortlessly. There's no dramatic twist to this ending. No climactic confrontation. Becca didn't appear on my doorstep with a suitcase in the rain. She didn't issue one final public plea. She simply vanished. Perhaps she left town. Perhaps she's reinventing herself again, under a new banner of healing. I don't know. And for the first time in a very long time, I don't need to know. Because my life no longer orbits the gravitational pull of her chaos. I kept my position at the writing center. I even helped inaugurate a new mentorship program for kids who simply don't fit into neat boxes. The ones too quiet, too strange, too emotional. The ones who remind me of a younger version of myself. The boy who mistakenly believed being soft meant being small, and Callie. We remained in contact slowly, cautiously. She isn't some replacement character in my narrative. She is her own chapter, unfolding at a pace that requires no acceleration. She brings tea when I forget to eat. She laughs at my terrible jokes. She understands how to sit in silence without the compulsion to fill it with sound. Last week, she presented me with a small gift, a new journal. Inside the front cover, she'd inscribed, "To the man who thought being broken meant being unworthy. You weren't broken, you were simply waiting to bloom." I didn't cry, not immediately, but later that night, with Spencer asleep beside me and the windows slightly ajar to welcome the spring air, I turned to a blank page and began writing again, not to process pain, not to survive it, but to commemorate the simple fact that I had navigated it, that sometimes the most profound act of love for oneself is to walk away from the person who taught you to despise your very being. And so, if you're listening right now, wherever you are, however adrift you might feel, let this be your personal beacon. You're permitted to pause, you are permitted to start anew, and you are unequivocally permitted to find happiness without the consent of the one who caused you pain. Thank you for joining me on Echo Tales tonight. If any part of this story resonated with something you've endured or bravely walked away from, please share it in the comments below. Tell us about the precise moment you finally chose yourself, or the unexpected way life surprised you for the better after. Everything seemed to crumble. We read every single one. And trust me, someone out there needs your voice just as profoundly as you once needed theirs. Join us for the next confession. Until then, safeguard your heart. You only have one.